The Code to Cash podcast.
Pricing is not a billing problem. Pricing is a code problem. Pricing is a product.
Price point is really the last thing that actually even matters.
You need to have the most atomic unit of your product, not your product.
Hello and welcome back to Code to Cash. This is your host Ajit, and today we have George Sadler with us. He's the Vice President of Revenue Operations at Simpro. So glad to have you on the podcast, George.
Hey, Ajit, thank you so much for making the invitation. I've been looking forward to it.
Awesome. George, I would, in general, we definitely start with folks' backgrounds when they come on the podcast. In this case, I'm very fascinated by your experience just because I'm a military brat myself. You worked in the Army, you worked, I think also I saw on your LinkedIn FBI as well as Marine Corps. So that's very interesting 3 organization combos. I would love to learn how your career journey started, and then eventually we'll get to revenue operations and monetization, but curious about your career start.
Well, thank you for the question. I get it a lot. The first thing I say is I'm not that old, but I've learned how to multitask and do many things simultaneously. Most of my schooling I've done at night while I'm trying to work, as an example. So I fit in my MBA and half my undergrad, et cetera. I started the career in the Marine Corps 3 days after I graduated high school. I couldn't get out fast enough. So, the other thing I would say as I stitch this all together is actually a theme and a message to this, and it all ladders up. Early on, working in the Marine Corps, I was a linguist. So I was taught by the Marine Corps 2 years in school learning Arabic. And then I learned how to use that skill in a special operations reconnaissance type signals intelligence environment, which taught me how to use information and turn it into intelligence that's then actionable by an operational team.
Makes sense.
And it sounds a lot like marketing sciences or sales operations and some of the other things we do. Or at one point in my career, I held the title of Chief Listening Officer at Dell when I was doing social media analytics. And again, there's so many parallels to where I started and where I ended up. But what I learned early on was I have a real passion for team sports, for winning, for having impact, outsized impact perhaps, big challenges. And using both my brain and the right brain, left brain, and my brain and my brawn, and kind of bringing it all together.
Right.
And a lot of the things that I've done since then have kind of fit that mold. But a little bit about my career. I said I started out in the Marine Corps enlisted, so no college degree. If those of you aren't familiar with the military, there's enlisted and officer. I traversed through the ranks of the Marine Corps for 6 years on active duty. First Gulf War, which dates me, does go quite a bit back in the 90s, so late 80s, early 90s. Then I decided to go to college, and I joined an ROTC program because I wanted to continue my career in the military, but finally heed my dad's advice of if you're going to be in the military, be an officer and go get a degree. I was 24 years old, so an older student. I had 2 years of college under the belt, so I was a transfer student. And I got into my safety school at UCLA with a declared major in Middle Eastern studies. So more language training, history, political science, economics, and related to the Middle East or the Near East or different. Most folks, it's basically, the Arab speaking part of the world, Arab Persian speaking part of the world. Some people include Afghanistan and Pakistan and others, and some don't. And just, but that region of the world. Joined ROTC with the Army this time, because I figured out where I wanted to spend the rest of my career, and it was as a special forces officer, specifically with 5th Group that was focused on the Middle East.
Okay.
And so that was I was kind of going to college to brush up on the soft skills that, that would complement my background in the Marine Corps and onto that career path. Met my wife in college. We just celebrated our 25th anniversary.
Oh, congrats.
3 girls. But we took my wife to upstate New York in the 10th Mountain Division and in the snow. She'll never let me live in the snow again. And she was an Army wife, a great one. I was deployed all the time as things go. And this was before 9/11. So just before 9/11. So late 90s, early 2000s. And my last deployment was in the Middle East, in Egypt. In a peacekeeping mission called Multinational Force and Observers, and MFO. I was gone for 6 months. I tell my kids that was it wasn't before the internet, but it was before video calls. So we were still doing phone calls with a card and standing in line at the payphone and one call a week sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was just rough. My wife was pregnant with our first child.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't want to, I was counting up the amount of time I was deployed. I said, in 10 years, I've been deployed 6.
Yeah.
I'm going into special forces after this. I'm probably going to be deployed another 6 out of 10.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Don't want to do that. So I got out.
Yeah. Okay, good.
And started in manufacturing, actually, as a third shift supervisor at Applied Materials, working in a clean room. Nice transition for a military officer. Started going to school at night, get my MBA. 9/11 happened, and I scratched my head and said, what am I doing? And so I applied to a bunch of different government agencies, and the FBI picked me up. And so I spent a couple years as a special agent in Washington, D.C. on a counterterrorism and foreign counterintelligence squad, chasing, working that problem. It was, just to put a timestamp on it, was during the 9/11 commissions in the mid-2000s. Okay. And for anybody who remembers that, there was a lot of infighting amongst the organizations, government organizations internally. That rubbed me the wrong way. It was just, I didn't want to be involved in all the politicking amongst, agencies that should be cooperating. So I have a brand new MBA. I said, I got to get out. I took a 50% pay cut to go work for the government and moved my family from Austin, Texas back to Washington, D.C. So higher cost of living, less money. Yeah. And it was painful. And if I wasn't having satisfaction at work, it wasn't worth the pain. So I got back on the track, and that's what led me to Dell. And then, the rest is on my LinkedIn profile. Lots of corporate work in a bunch of brands. Yeah.
Wow. Such an interesting career. I think when you were probably in the Middle East, we were, like, my family was somewhere in Kashmir. So we were just seeing the start of the India-Pakistan war. So interesting sort of timeline where, like, terrorism or at least militancy, or how people
extremism is what I tend to think about it. Extremist views, regardless of, it's a special set of problems and people.
So I'm very curious about something when you mentioned, like, you started your discussion with signals intelligence and operations. Yeah. I'm curious how you translate operations from a military environment. And having seen, like, I know how signal intelligence is gathered. Yeah. I've also been in the customer feedback side in my career in the Valley. Yeah. So I've seen operationally customer feedback flow in, like, large hospitality groups. Yeah. I'm curious what was the difference? Like, what was more important in one organization versus a civilian organization?
There's more similarities than differences, the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that business impact is more of a rallying cry in the military than it is in business. And by a rallying cry, I mean everybody in the military, everybody's focused on the objective. Yeah. The business objective, which is to win the battle, win the war, do whatever, take the hill, right? Yeah. Yeah. Everybody on the combined arm team is working on it. And so if you're supporting an operations team, the team that's actually taking the hill, and you're feeding them intelligence about watch out around that corner because there may be something waiting to surprise you. Yeah. You feel like you're part of the fight and you're contributing to the business objective, but everybody's focused on that. Yep. I see in organization, in corporate America, you get a lot of conflicting agendas and other things that create noise in the system that cause some teams, people to be less connected to the business objective as the primary function they're trying to optimize. Or conversely, they just have no connection. They know what the business objective is, but they have no idea how they contribute to it. Yeah. Because they're so far removed. So, the big takeaway for me is it was almost beat into me is that everything, there's only one objective that matters. It comes from the top down. It's the rallying cry. And no matter what you're doing, you got to understand how you're contributing to that objective, having impact. And then in an intelligence world where you're interpreting things that other people don't have time or don't know how to interpret, which has parallels to analytics and science, computer science, or marketing sciences and these sorts of things. You're interpreting it with the intent that it be actionable or impactful. Yeah. It's not good enough to be interesting. Nobody cares. It's like a waste of time, right? So.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. So in that context, is that like a root cause diagnosis? Is this a organization culture problem? Is it a different set of incentives? that drive this. And
Yeah.
when you run your own teams, and you've been running different levels of marketing as well as operations teams across a set of companies like Dell and Adobe, most just now you've joined Simpro. I'm curious, how do you try to organize your team to at least better solve for the at least inefficiencies that you observed?
Mm. It's actually, I think, one of the biggest promises of RevOps when they're deployed, when it's deployed appropriately, and it's something I'm trying to build out in my current company, and have the mandate to do it. It's breaking down the silos. The silos are there likely because of incentive structures, but quite possibly because of personnel, people as well, and people agendas, but likely it's just misaligned incentives. If RevOps does what it's promised to do, it will break down those silos and get the functional teams to work cross-functionally towards a common objective function, because they understand the term I use in house is the transfer function between whatever it is they're trying to do and the only objective that matters for the company, which is revenue velocity, revenue acceleration, hitting the revenue plan. The profitability is a component of that as well. Typically, at my current company, we're focused on profitability and revenue, and you got to do both. But a lot of functions, marketing in particular, sales is pretty easy. I got a quota.
Yeah.
Quota's revenue.
Yeah.
I'm delivering on revenue, right?
Yeah.
And sales organizations tend to not have the misalignment, because quotas are and comp plans are exactly aligned typically. And so everybody's focused and they're all doing the right thing. In marketing, it's more complex. It's complex in B2C especially, but in B2B as well. How do I connect what I'm doing in an event or sending emails or through paid search? Paid search is a little easier. Affiliate marketing is a harder one. Partner marketing is even harder. How do I tie what I'm doing there to revenue? And how do I do it in a world where we all know it's not linear, yet the only yardsticks we typically have are linear yardsticks?
Makes sense.
Winner take all. I did this, you did that. How could you have done it if I did it? I'm going to take credit for that. You can't. And it creates all this just bickering amongst the So revenue ops is there to solve that.
Yeah, makes sense.
To make sure everybody's pulling in the right direction.
Makes sense. Coming back a little bit to your experiences at Dell and as well as Adobe, you had mentioned when we were chatting before starting the podcast is you were implementing systems for these companies even before there was CRM, right? So I'm curious what that world looked like, and
absolutely,
I'm curious, how did you even make the decision to buy a system, right? Today CRM is not questioned. Nobody loses their job for buying Salesforce.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did businesses run then, and can businesses learn anything from that state today?
Yes. First off, I would say that I remember a world before cell phones. I remember a world before personal devices, much less cell phones. I remember a world before CRM. So when I first got to Dell, I was a sales ops, marketing ops sort of individual contributor, then took over managed the teams, worked in the public sector and the commercial side of the business in the US. But initially during this time when our CRM, as well as our tracking for marketing effectiveness, lived in Excel. And one of my jobs was for 2 weeks every quarter was to rehydrate, I would say, recreate the new workbook for the next quarter and publish it for the sellers. Our install base, our prospects, everything we know about them, contacts, email addresses, historical revenue by product, etc. Right? Like that sort of stuff. Targeting, sell to these, sell this to that, all that good stuff sent to them. That was the state of the business when we brought Salesforce in. I wasn't involved in that decision. I was too early and young in my career.
Yeah.
But looking around the corner, the way that business ran at that time, that was a mature organization. Dell was, 30, 40 billion hardware, something like that, if I think about it. They sold hardware to just about every company in the world, especially in the United States. So with large companies like that, there is quite a bit of a balance of trade discussion that typically goes on. And if it's imbalanced, you'll find that their products tend to get pulled into large organizations because I would imagine Salesforce was buying computers from somebody.
Makes sense.
And if
Makes
they had
sense.
a large Dell relationship, then guess what? The rep gets a meeting.
Interesting.
The
Interesting.
Salesforce rep gets a meeting, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
the conversation kind of goes,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
writing a huge check for you. We're one of your big customers.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't have a CRM system.
Yeah.
Let's talk.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember back in the day when we needed to drive top line profitability. And in the upper end, we had tiered segments in our G500, our Fortune 500 account segment globally.
Mm-hmm.
That sales team would go to a well-known internet company, I won't name, and every quarter, if they needed to, they would go in and sell tens of, in early 2000s. So, numbers are a little different. Decimal points might have moved, but tens of millions of dollars in servers
Mm-hmm.
at negative 30 points of margin to hit their top line.
Interesting.
It's like, I know I can pull that lever all day long when I need to. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what happens at big companies and how things get done,
Mm-hmm.
I think is totally different than your
Mm-hmm.
mid-market space and your
Yeah.
SMB, where it's really around feature functionality, pricing, is it a pain?
Hmm.
You're going
Hmm.
from nothing to something. It's just different. So, but
Yeah.
there it was, I'm sure it was something along like I just explained.
Understood. What's in terms of how the operation side of the business runs, right? Like you mentioned that you were doing this manual work for 2 weeks every quarter.
Yeah.
So now there has been a lot of automation that has come in. Yet for some reason, I don't really, I can't compare before and after, but it still feels like there is, I don't know if there is an automation problem nowadays, but there is still an issue in getting things to move efficiently, right? Like when I was helping out 2 companies before this, my revenue operations team would implemented pricing, we implemented some other go-to-market systems like CPQ.
Yeah.
We still had data issues.
Yeah.
It's almost like every company I speak with, nobody ever has the right data that is cleaned up and nobody can report off of it. So I wonder if things improved and did they like not improve enough, because it feels like you're still sort of just trying to get out of the mud most of the times, or maybe I'm wrong in my perception. But
No, you're right. Every story is unique. I will start by saying it doesn't have to be that way. And I've got an example that I'll bring to light in a second, but I've worked in enough companies, and large and small now, and seen the same problem. You've got systems being deployed without a lot of thought as to the people in the process that goes along with it. You just think you buy the system and everything, your world gets better. You've got, in some cases, multiple systems that don't talk to one another, and nobody's thinking about stitching the data together. Everybody thinks they can put everything they need into one system, one operational system, when that's just not the world we live in. You need to get the data that matters into a cloud-based architecture that you can then use for both data science. It's a middle layer, if you will, data science and operational views of countable data, dashboards, reports, and things of that nature. Curate it and then serve that up to the business, where those views are designed to support business processes around decision making and other sorts of things. Unless you can buy a piece of technology that out of the box solves your problem. Too many companies try to make the software they've bought into something it's not, to solve a problem it wasn't designed to solve. I've seen this play out a number of times, and they do 2 things. One is they customize it so much that they can no longer plug anything else into it like it was designed to. So they're throwing away all the R&D, those other companies that are building new widgets and stuff that'll make your life easier.
Right.
And they're removing the ability to ever get rid of that software.
Yeah.
And get stuck into it forever. And if a better mousetrap comes along, they'll never be able to unwind it because it's so customized that the whole business will break.
Yeah.
So, but it's a challenge of, when I used to do customer analytics, I used to talk about becoming a customer intelligent organization. And the problem exists today. It exists when I was at Dell 20 years ago. When I was at Dell 20 years ago, the story was something like this. We had a big account at a Fortune 50 US company go sideways. Big deal. Big tens of millions of dollars renewal, right? It went sideways. Why? Because one of the decision makers, C-suite executive, had a daughter in college. The daughter in college bought a Dell notebook through the student buy program on the consumer side of the business and had a warranty issue with it. $2,000 laptop, $1,500, $1,000 of that, who knows? The support team that took care of it bungled it on the consumer side of the business. Daughter talks to father over the weekend. Sales team comes in to work the next bit of the deal, and the only thing they're talking about is this warranted laptop thing through the whole meeting, right? How easy would it have been even then? And I used to tell the story at Dell to the teams that could impact this. I said, how easy would it have been to flag that account as a household of an important C-suite executive decision maker on the B2B side to the sales, to the support team? Just say, they don't have to give all that information. Just build a process that says through their workflow, hey, treat this customer special, do whatever it takes to make them happy. They're important. Here, we'll get you a new laptop. And that whole conversation on Monday could have been totally different. But one side of the business wasn't talking to the other, and the systems had the data. We could back then. I've as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, I had that same I had the same conversation at Adobe, and a year ago I had the same conversation at my last company. Because we're not putting the data together. We've got people on one end and businesses on the other. And for businesses that have B2C and B2B relationships, they have 2 relationships with those people. One is the business relation, one is the consumer, but they're not talking to each other. So being customer intelligent, as I lean into revenue operations, it's the same problem all over again. How do we become revenue intelligent as an organization such that any decision that we hope to impact revenue generation, revenue velocity, what have you, is informed by anything the organization knows that would help them make that decision in an automated sort of way? Well, that means that your ERP, your accounting system has to talk to your Salesforce CRM, has to talk to your marketing bid. You have to have all that. You probably need all the data I talked about to have a holistic picture of the customer, right? What's the customer relationship? All those things matter. The transfer functions between the operational metric you're driving and revenue. How much is one piece of thought leadership put out into the market through your thought leadership program worth on a revenue basis, and how long does it take to turn into revenue? That's what I mean by transfer function. When I pull on this lever, I put a person in a seat, $1 in the system, something. What do I get in the other end, and how long does it take to turn into revenue? That's what I think the promise of revenue operations is. And it's not going to be one piece of it's not going to be one tool. It's not going to be, there's a lot of folks selling software that promises to stitch all this stuff together and give you an automatic answer. I've not seen anything that is super compelling at this point, because I still think we still need a human in the loop that understands what's going on. But that's the hard problem right now, I think.
Makes sense. Very interesting. I want to pivot a little bit closer to the topic of monetization specifically in the context of revenue operations. So you've just started a new role at a company. So generalizing that a little bit, if you were to chart out how you think about the process of, making money and, getting money, reporting on money, making sure that the whole end-to-end cycle is happening. What systems do you have to build from your perspective to make that cycle happen?
Taking a practical approach, realizing that nothing's perfect, leaning on some experience I've had about standing up 5 acquisitions in 90 days and running them out of SQL if need be. I start with just canvas what you've got, the systems you've got, and ask yourself, what's the source system for the data that you need in a perfect world to run the business? Then make sure everybody is able to access that source data for whatever needs or whatever dashes or analytics they're doing. That'll typically require that you extract data from the operational systems into some other layer so that you can stitch it together, transform it, connect it. You need a data engineer to do that. And then you need analysts that can push dashboards and or do ad hoc analysis on top of that. Then everybody's at least on the same sheet of music. And then you're not tied you're not tied to any of those downstream operational systems either. So again, you can go after the best of breed sort of, what do we need now for this or that thing? I got asked this question when I first started a couple weeks ago. What's your favorite technology for X? And having sold a bunch of technology and having bought a bunch of technology, I would say that my gut answer is it's usually, what is my business, what are my people trained to use and leverage?
Yeah, makes
Because
sense.
that's the fastest route to money. Now, if they're going from nothing to something, they got to learn something. And now I'm looking at feature functions and a bunch of other things. But
Yeah, yeah,
if I've already got something, they know how to use it, I'm probably, the time to value is much shorter than bringing in the next best widget until it leapfrogs and just makes it totally different.
Yeah.
Then it's cost, unfortunately. I mean, that's important, but I'm not the one using the technology. So it's my opinion matters less than what the team uses. What I want to understand is, will it interoperate? Like, because that's where the friction usually comes up.
Yeah, yeah,
If I bring something in that doesn't work with everything else I've got, it better be like, it better solve world hunger, because it's going to create a bunch of friction.
yeah. Actually, there's a debate on that topic of interoperability. There is this whole quote to cash sort of process that is defined in the industry. That's a term that's often used. And there is a whole sort of life cycle where you first define your offers, what you want to sell. Then there are a bunch of systems that help the seller sell it. You close the contract goes into a billing system, then you book it. And I hear there are new startups coming in the space that say, well, this is a problem, so we're just going to build one system that rules them all. And then there are some systems that say, oh, we really do this small thing really well, but you need to hook up 5 separate systems to make it all work, and we are the best of breed for this one thing. And then I'm just trying to compare. So there is the best of breed, there is the one system to rule them all, Lord of the Rings thing, and then there is, we'll build something on our own. So how do you, like, the market is offering so much noise to you, like how do you best take these things and build something and avoid the disasters? Because I saw you grimace a little bit with the first one. So
I have a preference, and I think I have a point of view as to why one is picked over others. A lot of times it's just being lazy. I have a relationship with someone, I'm going to buy their stuff. I've already bought a bunch of their stuff, or it's cost first. I can get better leverage out of this contract if I add on their stuff versus going and buying someone else, or somebody trying to protect their business. And they'll, we saw this in the big software plays. They protect their business by giving away the new product.
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, I'm just going to give it away. So you want to go buy it from someone. I've also seen software we couldn't sell even if we gave it away to large companies. Why? Because there were hidden costs associated with swapping or changing or whatnot. So you got to overcome all that. But on the inside, as you're thinking about, again, I go back to, I think the right way to think about this is I gotta solve the problem for my own world, which is different than everybody else's world. What do I have today? Where did I come from? How skilled is my labor force? GA4 may be super cool, but if nobody knows how to use it, I'm going to take a impact to revenue as I migrate over to the next widget. If I've got what I've got is good enough, you got to what's the pain point? What am I trying to solve? It's not always about getting the better mousetrap. The other thing I would say is when you get to scale, I saw this at eBay and a couple of other places. We had way too many resources to build our own stuff. The engineers like to build their own stuff. They can always make a better mousetrap, and they probably can. But my opinion has always been, if you've got that sort of resource on your team, have them build something you cannot buy, so that you can get two things for one. Go have them build something you can't buy, and go buy something you can buy that they could have done better. Right. Otherwise, you get incremental returns for a lot of wasted effort. And it's hard to get those engineering teams to say, well, we'll just buy this off the shelf.
Interesting. Curious, what comes up most often? Like, if you had in your previous job, if you had this sort of excess engineering capacity, what would you want to have them build?
Okay. So it's a cool story. When I was at eBay, I got hired by the chief data officer, who was a new role and a new function. We were working to support the global growth marketing organization. So paid, earned, owned globally. Give you a sense of the scale. This was a few years ago. Easily $1 billion with a B of paid media spend a year. So big budgets, right? 1 point of return efficiency on $1 billion spend is a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so they put a lot of energy into optimizing. It was a really interesting case study. What we were trying to do when I got there was make sense of customer data. Nobody had ever made sense of it. Yes, less made much use of it. We had 20 years-ish of behavioral data on the website that we never threw away, down to the cookie level.
Interesting.
And we spent a while stitching it all together. What became, I have to find the link, but you could probably find it on eBay. You can now look at your eBay history, and it shows a timeline of everything you've done, buying, selling, bid, offer, kind of join. That didn't exist because they couldn't do it when we got there.
Makes
but
sense.
Once we put that all together, then we started thinking, how do we grow the business? And so we got into personalization, we got into uplift models, we got into, how do we growth hack that data and deploy it through our email channels or our paid media or social media channels? Can we use it for targeting? Can we use it to drive personalization on the merch strip level on the website? Otherwise, can we, we just started to make money with that data. We call that personalization now. But back then, you couldn't buy any of that stuff.
Makes sense.
When I was at Dell, that was before Demand Base. A friend of mine called Rishi Dave, who's since done a couple of CMO gigs and is now at Bain. He was running the B2B side of Dell.com, and I was running the social media analytics team. And we collaborated to brute force figure out IP addresses mapped to our CRM system in Salesforce, so that we could determine what accounts we're looking at on our website.
Interesting.
And we made a ton of money with that prospecting. That is now called 6 Sense.
Oh, wow.
It's not 6. I mean, it's the concept of what 6 Sense sells. But that's what we were just. What did we do? We went and got the web logs. And we shipped it offshore to a lower cost region, and we had them literally do who is lookups one at a time on the web.
Oh my God.
Go over to our CRM and input manually the IP address. And once you had the IP address block, you could fill in the blanks, because most B2B companies have static IP addresses, and we knew enough about that. So now once we built that, then we take that data set, went back to our web logs and started mapping it to CRM accounts. And then we had to figure out what was on the page. Because we didn't know what was on the page. So Rishi says, fine, I'll change the URLs to include the product name on the page. So now we can say what product they were looking at. And next thing you know, I know that this company's looking at storage. And, oh, by the way, we don't sell storage to them. Because I have it on a spreadsheet or in the CRM. Right? And so now I know that's a prospect. Now what do I do with it? It's a hot lead. No form. No form. Formless leads. Right?
This sounds a little bit like some open source intelligence stuff.
It is intelligence that's operationally actionable.
Yes.
And it's thinking outside the box, and it's thinking about what data do we have and how could we use it. But nowadays that's called personalization. Right? It's like, so now what do? We unlocked that at Adobe. Same playbook, by the way. When I got there, they weren't doing that. But now I could buy Demand Base, so I could get the IP address mapped to but they didn't know what to do with it. So we figured out what to do with it. And that turned into, first visit personalization on the website. When they come in, we know what that account is interested in because we've seen account behavioral activity. That visitor may or may not have ever been at the website. In fact, they probably have not, because you get 1 to 2 visits per visitor per sales cycle in the enterprise. I know from experience. So that visitor probably has never been to the website, but we know what their peers are looking at. So we suspect that they're interested in the same thing, and we serve up the same content.
Makes sense.
And it's likely more relevant than them hunting and pecking and looking for whatever they came to look for. Until we had a signal at the cookie level that says they're actually not interested in that, they're interested in something else. Okay, let's flip the personalization to that. Right.
So companies have been doing personalization for a long time. It's
longer than you've been able to buy it, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
early days with Dell, it made a ton of sense to build that.
Yeah.
Your question of what would you
Yeah.
build? Something I can't buy.
Yeah.
Like I know I
Yeah.
can figure out how to make money with this. I just got to,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I can figure out how to put it all together.
Yeah.
But now I can buy it. I would never
Yeah.
do that again. I
Yeah.
just go to 6
Yeah.
cents and go,
Yeah.
or something like it.
Makes sense.
Demand base and whatever. But
Makes sense. Makes sense. Very, very cool
okay.
story. Very cool. So one area that I'd like to probe a little bit more on, which is just a personal, little bit selfish interest of mine, is in the sales cycle, there is this whole dance of negotiating, especially in an enterprise sales cycle, dance of negotiating price with the prospect. I'm curious, what for B2B enterprise sales, what sort of problems you encounter in this deal stage, and what pressures do you face as a RevOps team, and what challenges do you face in this stage, and what processes or systems that you implement make that piece a little bit easier?
Yeah.
So that you can get higher deal velocity, maybe higher ACV.
So deal velocity doesn't always correlate linearly or positively with revenue. Like sometimes you slow deals down to make them bigger, and that's a good trade-off.
Yeah.
What I would say is that as a RevOps leader, I'm concerned with understanding how we make money and how the system works, how the throughput works, and velocity and bottlenecks, and how much it costs me to increase the throughput based on pulling various levers. And I'm also looking for friction, because friction causes friction in the process, the selling process, the success, the handoff between I sold it and I'm implementing it, the handoff between that and the account management team, or the renewal cycle, or any friction anywhere in any revenue generating function. Even like I was in house, we were having this conversation around, maybe this is less intuitive, but it paints a point. Our learning and development team is embedded within our HR function, for lack of a better word, chief people officer. They have a heavy hand in teaching our customers how to use our technology. So they're customer facing too, the in-house as well as, which means they now impact retention rates and product usage, because product usage, retention, all that. So now I'm concerned with the investment we have in that and what we're getting in return, and how do we optimize it. And it is a friction point or a bottleneck in our revenue generation and retention. It's way outside the lanes of sales, but it's piece, right? So
the key, which I was trying to probe a little bit specifically, is in a sales cycle there are different stages, and there is a stage where you propose something to the prospect and say, hey, this is what I suggest, and then you have a negotiation, you propose different options, there is approvals a rep has to go through internally, there are different rules and like booking rules that you have to account for, and then you get to deal signature. So I'm more curious, like nowadays the sales cycles are getting longer, just given the environment, and what helps at this stage? Like what are you seeing, and what would help? It could be human, it could be system. Like what is the solution for what can RevOps do today?
So Deal Desk is a function that I include in my vision of what my role is. It's the operational side of things. And it is the point you're making, that Deal Desk sort of special deal, non-CPQ, can automate it sort of flow in the deal cycle is one of the biggest friction points, I think, in my experience in the last 3 companies I've worked for. And I've seen it all the way from hundreds of people trying to do this manually. Why? Because you built a system that started off manual, and they never tried to create an automated system, and now it's too customized, and they can't buy anything off the shelf that will replicate the way they do things. So they're stuck in this manual process, and they keep adding bodies to it. To we never had anybody doing this. It was all informal through Slack, and they would just Slack a bunch of people, and that's super inefficient. I got to Slack the legal team, and someone to get involved in it. There's no Jira tickets, no tracking. So the reps are spending a ton of time chasing everybody in the organization, trying to get what they need to get done. Or something in the middle where you start to add smartly processes and thinking through velocity of removing the friction through human in the loop sort of things. And maybe there's some technology that can help, especially around tracking of workflow. And, is it a Jira ticket that gets exposed to Salesforce in the CRM system so they don't have to actually jump out of their workflow to check on the status of the thing they submitted? Do you have a human in the loop there that says, I care about you and your deal, and I get gold and metric on making it happen faster and all that stuff by fixing all the sludge? And then working with the back office that's distributed and working out the agreements with them, but also doing things like setting floors and pricing and distributing decision making. We were just in my last gig, we were going down this path where used to be the pricing committee made all decisions. Well, that didn't scale. So how do we get some of that discretionary pricing to the sales leaders so that they can, and then the reps have their own sort of level. And so we've got this triage of now it hits deal desk. Deal desk is a person now. So they've got some discretion, but they also have business sense and kind of business acumen and can ask the tough questions and try to determine if it's a good trade, get. And then eventually the pricing committee. Gosh, I'd love to be able to automate some of that. But it's just being thoughtful about putting in the appropriate level of process and controls to increase velocity, not increase the ability for people to say no, which is what creates all the friction. Or just take too long. We just had a deal we lost, I believe, looking at the record, because we took too long to close it. And then the situation on the customer side changed, and all of a sudden, budget's gone.
Totally. Well, thanks so much, George, for all the insights on RevOps and systems. I want to pause and just probe on one piece again. We can probably publish this as a small clip just because it's a personal interest topic. So you mentioned that, with your military background, that had a link to your joining Simpro. So I'm wondering, is there a message you want to leave for both employers as well as new fresh veterans who are just exiting the forces? What is your message for them, and what value, what do veterans need to know, and what do employers need to know?
Without unwinding the story, I'll tell you in a nutshell, veterans offer more value to businesses than I think most business owners know, and that's okay, because there aren't that many veterans relative to the U.S. population. My wife didn't have any veterans in her family. So, there's lots of folks that have never had exposure to it, but a ton of value around work ethic and time management and discipline and self-discipline and a bunch of other things. But I'm the connection to Simpro. We do workflow management for the services industry, HVAC, plumbing, construction. Well, my first job in college was as a plumbing assistant and a warehouse manager working for my uncle, who was the office manager. And I remember his interview question to me was, okay, so you spent 6 years in the Marine Corps, you're 24 years old, staff sergeant, can't really do anything, can you? And 6 months later, I had digitized his warehouse and his inventory system and all of his trucks. And he's like, oh my gosh, I took DB3 and wrote a program, which is at a very, very small scale, the kind of stuff that Simpro does today. And so I'm like, I totally get that business problem. But also, veterans can do more than you think if you give them a shot.
A lot more. Thanks so much, George. Super glad to have you on today. Thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it.
For sure, Edge. It's been fun. Thank you for the invitation.